Hiya, I'm Alice Guthrie, and I translate from Arabic. So, the writer and academic Zaher Omareen was born in the Syrian city of Hama in 1985, just 3 years after the massacres of 25 to 35,000 people committed there by the Assad regime. That's Assad the father. You're about to hear an extract from a story called Milk, Halib in Arabic, taken from his forthcoming collection, Tales of the Orontes River, or Hikayat al-Asi. This book is not only the first ever literary work to openly address the massacres, but in another huge break with convention, the stories are written entirely in the local oral dialect rather than in formal standard Arabic, reflecting the way they've been handed down until now, orally. Here, as in each story in the collection, a parent is telling their child a tale from the events, the euphemism universally adopted until now in Syria to refer to the massacres. And in Arabic it begins, والله هيك يعني لكن لأنه ما ضل حدا بحما ما ردع من صدرها. حتى أخوك الكبير لما نطت حليبي بالأحداث ردعاته هي على يرحمها. Yeah, that's right. There's absolutely no one in the whole city she hasn't breastfed. Even your older brother, actually. She fed him when my milk dried up during the events. May she rest in peace. Is that why he used to call her Yammu when he was little? Yeah, exactly. We got him used to doing that when he was really small. And it would blow her mind when kids called her that. She loved it. And there were lots more like your brother, of course. In those days, Ya Latif, there were so many tiny babies whose mothers had passed away in the events when they were still breastfeeding. Every time we found an orphaned baby who needed breastfeeding, we'd take it straight to Mahmoud. And then, of course, there were all little babies whose mother's milk had dried up from shock and terror, like mine had. And Mahmoud, my God, she was incredible. She was such a warm, motherly person that her breasts were like cream churns, swollen with this rich nourishment which somehow or other never dried up, luckily for all those children. Even though at the time she was probably getting on for 40, but Ya Latif, what trouble and heartache that story brought to some of us later on. Why? What happened? What happened? All the families got mixed up. No one knew anymore whose child was whose. Or, like what happened with Ibn Siqqa, it was such a terrible thing. What happened? I'm getting there, love. Hang on. When they raided Bain al-Hayrain in 82, during the events, apparently there was no one left alive from that neighborhood to even tell the tale. Very late one night, the baker, Abu Khaldun, he was very well known in Hama back then, actually, because his bread was as fluffy and light as whipped cream. It was such great bread. Anyway, late one night, he heard someone knocking really loudly at his door. And in those days, you see, we all knew that a knock on the door in the night could only mean two things. We were either going to prison or going to be executed. So Abu Khaldun got himself up and quickly said goodbye to his kids and then to his wife. And he put on his sheepskin coat. It was bone-cracking cold out there. And he opened the door. And there, on the doorstep, he found a soldier standing in the bitter cold night with a tiny baby in his arms, still in its swaddling, chilled to the bone and crying its eyes out. With his eyes full of tears, the soldier put the baby into Abu Khaldun's arms and said, "Take this. It's all that's left of Bain al-Hayrain." As Abu Khaldun, the baker, tells it himself, "I took that baby and I tucked him in between my two children in their bed, and straight away he warmed up and fell asleep. I got back into bed with my wife, and I made a vow to God himself right there that this baby would be one of my own children." The next day there was a sudden raid on our neighborhood and they banged on the door. They were coming to get me. But then the soldier who'd brought me the baby that night recognized me, and he spared me. By the grace of that child, I was saved. Well, that baby had still been breastfeeding when it lost its mother, so it needed milk. Khaldun threw herself at the problem with a passion, soaking tiny scraps of bread in water and trying to feed them to the little one. But he was only a newborn. He wasn't ready for solids at all. And before even a couple of days had passed, he started getting weak and ill, and he'd screamed so much he'd lost his voice. That baby was on the brink of death, basically. Abu Khaldun was absolutely losing it. He started rushing around, searching frantically for milk all over the city. But there literally wasn't a drop of milk to be had in all of Hamma right then. It wasn't milking season yet. It was February, and the sheep wouldn't produce any milk at all until the middle of March. And then Abu Khaldun heard that Mahmoud was breastfeeding all those orphaned children. He picked up the baby at once, and he rushed over to her place. Mahmoud says that when she saw Ibn Siqqa crying noiselessly like that, half dead, something happened inside her, and her milk just started gushing out like never before. In those days, I was constantly taking your brother around to Mahmoud's place so she could feed him too. My God, I'll never forget what it was like, son. We were practically queuing up to get our babies fed. Her house wasn't big, and we'd take her whatever God provided. One of us might have an egg for her, another brought some bread, maybe someone else brought some meat or a bit of veg. Because all of us were really up against it, really struggling to feed our families. Yeah, what happened to Ibn Siqqa then? Well, Ibn Siqqa grew up into a boy, and Abu Khaldun was his father. He'd adopted him. And he brought him up very well, educating him about religion and morality and good manners. He grew up into a young man with impeccable morals. Eventually, Abu Khaldun decided it was time to get him married. And so he got him engaged to this gorgeous girl, as pretty as the moon, called Fatima. I still remember her. Sure enough, they got married. Of course, Abu Khaldun had always really, really spoiled Ibn Siqqa, like no one's ever been spoiled before or since. He used to say to the rest of his kids, if it wasn't for this boy, I wouldn't be here with you today. I owe him my life. The lavish wedding he laid on for him was the talk of all Hamma. Mahmoud danced this incredible wild dance at the wedding, and she didn't cover her hair in front of Ibn Siqqa. She said, this is the one child who I've never forgotten feeding. When he latched on, my milk would come down in such torrents I could have fed all the babies in the city from both sides of the river, from Al-Hadith al-Suq. And she worked her way around all the guests in turn, telling them, this is my son's wedding. So time passed and seasons changed and Fatima fell pregnant. But just 2 months into her pregnancy, she lost the baby, poor thing. She got pregnant again and she miscarried again. There was a third miscarriage, then a fourth. The baby would die inside that poor woman's belly before 2 months were up, every time. Poor Fatima. Her mother had passed away by that point and her father was a very old man. So the women of the neighborhood started to get really involved, and they went to great lengths to help her. What do you mean? Let me finish, son. You'll see. They were so thorough. They left no stone unturned in their search for an answer. And in the end, they worked out there was nothing wrong with the girl. She wasn't ill, but she too had been breastfed by Mahmoud during the events. Her mum's milk had dried up, just like mine had, because of everything that was going on. So it turned out that poor Ibn Siqqa had married his milk sister, and that's why she couldn't reach full term on any of her pregnancies. Thanks.